A big part of my career has been looking at the therapeutic value of the 12 steps because the 12 steps really have harnessed some powerful psychological forces that creates an amazing change in our life. What is that change? Well, the truth is that the 12 steps are engineered to help us achieve emotional sobriety, to achieve true independence of spirit, to achieve autonomy, to learn how to take care of ourselves. These are things that we don't know. Emotional sobriety really helps us learn how to have a healthy relationship, how to have union with the preservation of our integrity, how to cooperate with integrity. Most of us get lost in our relationships. Most of us do a lot of things we don't want to do. We don't really know how to show up in a good way. Emotional sobriety is about learning to have healthy relationships.
Hello, everybody. My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic and honored to be here. I excited actually, and different today. A lot of times I have an outline and I have slides to go with it, and it's not how I want to approach it today. I read it, the chapter, and as I was reading the chapter, I was impacted with thoughts and feelings and awarenesses, and they seem to flow in my notes in some sort of a logic. Let's just see if this works. I'm going to pay attention to my notes and kind of allow them to just fill in my interpretation of and perhaps the impact of this chapter on me. Life is difficult. Of course, that's the line from The Road Less Traveled, that very first famous line. Life is difficult. We try to avoid suffering and to be safe. And I'm aware of that now due to all of this work that Dr. Berger has exposed us to in emotional sobriety, but also with the work that we did in self-esteem. We want to fit in and belong. This has been always in the back of my mind as a driving force. I did not know that. I would have actually prided myself on the fact that I had been a monk in solitude, silence for 7 years. I don't need anybody. I'm an independent, but it's not true when I looked at my behavior 5 years sober, when I'm 48 years old, looking at all of this through inventory. We avoid facing our limitations. I didn't know I had any until I did that inventory, and especially the step 6 and 7 character defects. All of my awarenesses and consciousness has come from doing the step work that initial time in 1988, and then several times since then over a 20-year period with 3 different people. Haven't done that work for 20 years, but have stayed gently pressed up against it to, in fact, improve that consciousness on a consistent and daily basis is my interpretation of it. We seek realization from material goods, validation from material goods and people's approval, which is what was the major embarrassing revelation in the step 4 inventory, that in column 3 of the resentment inventory, I saw the story. I saw the beliefs. I saw the victim mentality. I was so embarrassed, not only by the facts of it, but by the realization that I had never seen it, despite all of the introspective exposure that I had had in psychology and philosophy and religion and therapy. And I had never had a hint of mint of any of this delusional life that I lived in behind the facade of a Hollywood storefront. You get the picture of how they make movies. There's nothing behind the set. It looks really good from the street, but there's nothing there. It's just a facade that's been built. That's the persona, that's the mask that I wore that began to be deconstructed as a result of that process. revealing these dependencies on material things and validation from other people, and getting the car and the money and the prestige and the titles and the whatever else accoutrements that I could acquire to shine my star, thinking I had one. I discovered that I was self-centered, and it was a shock to me. I mean, pathologically so. Dr. Berger helped me see that when he gave me the photocopy of the 9 characteristics of narcissism from the DSM. If you haven't looked at that and you're open-minded, it might be quite revealing, embarrassing as it was for me anyway. And not to say everybody is, but there's that self-centeredness that is some level of degree, 1 to 10 on a Richter scale, for instance. I had a script and a story, and I didn't know that. I had expectations that were so buried, so dark, that I didn't know that I had them. I thought I was just motivated. I'm a positive, energetic, optimistic. Yeah, no, I was driven compulsively. The lenses through which I looked were warped, but I couldn't see that I didn't see, because those were the lenses through which I was looking. And this process allowed me to look at the lenses. If that sounds a little bit, it is vague, but until you do it. It's kind of like the saying, I try to express the experience to you, but if you haven't had the experience, you can't hear it. If you had had the experience, you don't need to hear it. Deep down, I believed that perfect was real, that was in fact practice makes perfect, that was a legitimate spiritual principle. And I've come to see that, of course, it's not. It's totally delusional. Practice makes progress. It doesn't make perfect. One of the things that I learned the words from Dr. Luskin in this whole forgiveness process was the unenforceable rules. That's what I had. In fact, people used to say, Herb's the rule maker. Herb writes the book about the rules, how everybody should behave. Well, of course, I know some stuff. And the world, yes, I think you kind of relate to it in some fashion. But for me, life and others were and are responsible for my disturbances. I was a perennial victim. I wouldn't have ever put it in those kinds of sentences, because I want you to introduce you to my father and to my mother and to my wife and to my bosses. You would understand then why I have these attitudes and these disturbances. I am not capable of addressing and satisfying my own needs. I did not know that. I thought if I know more and try harder, get up earlier, run harder, stay up later, all of that's going to make Herbie exactly what Herbie needs to be. But there was never enough. That was the slogan, never enough. I didn't know it. I was actually kind of proud of it. This is the Western way. This is the capitalist achievement orientation. Never enough. Don't be satisfied. And yet I was driven by it at a sense of neurosis. I'm sure there's a name for it someplace. I never really felt I fit any place. I never felt comfortable. I never felt I had sufficient skills or power or competency. I was always attempting to protect the peek behind the curtain, because then you would see that I'm not who I say I am. And I wasn't conscious of the fear of that until, in fact, I was, by going through the inventory, supplemented by therapeutic practice, the empty chair, which I hated. But I got a real sense in step 6 and 7 of those character defects, and I got a real insight that although I have these instincts, and everybody has them, and they're normal, they've been warped by my personality, by my family of origin, by lots of other things, but that I do have the power of knowing them and the power of having some change. I not only am powerless, though, with regard to the inclination and some of the behavior, I have the ability to change my behavior as long as I hold myself accountable. I believe in the spirit and the power and the immaterial and the invisible. I believe in God as I don't understand it. I have no problem with that. I can't put it into legitimate words, but I don't care to. I act as if it's all true. I'm a very practical person. I've learned to be dependent on that power, but in partnership, and my willingness and responsibility to take the actions that will modify my behavior and eventually modify the inclinations to the behavior, which is in fact absolutely my experience. That I do have the power of choice, not over the addiction and not over managing my life on my own power. I'm very clear on that, that I have a partnership. Whatever this spirit is, this partner is, that's the managing partner. And I sit in the presence of that managing partner on a daily basis, receiving guidance and strength to do it. Like the 11th step says, praying for the knowledge of God's will and the power to do it. Because many times I know what to do, especially in the past. 20 years ago, I knew what to do, but I wasn't doing it. And that's not the way I live my life today. Today, I know what to do, and thanks to the work that we've been doing here and the invitations I've had to identify principles and core values, I'm very clear now and getting clearer on a daily basis as to what those values are and how they manifest in our behavior. That I have choice. That I have choice to be in alignment with reality or not. And reality is not personal. I mean, that's such a glib statement, but it's such a profound wisdom. It pierced the curtain where I can really live that way. Reality is just reality. Don't take it personally. People are just doing what people do. Don't take it personally. It says everything about them. It says nothing about me, unless it does. I mean, I get feedback from people's conscious or unconscious behavior as a reaction to my conscious or unconscious behavior. So I'm conscious, but I don't have anything to defend anymore. I don't have to defend anymore. I'm not saying I'm perfect at all, but I live in this effort at attempted consciousness to make to not take reality and or people personally. One of my teachers talks about the core of goodness. It's a great phrase, that each human being has a core of goodness. And that's where we come from. That light in us, that is us, is that core of goodness. That consciousness, the thing that makes me absolutely human is my consciousness. And to improve that consciousness is to improve my humanity. To improve all of that is to improve how I manifest in my daily life, in my interactions, and in my actions. A distinction between my mistakes and me. I'm not my mistake. I make mistakes, but now I course correct. That has allowed me to just be so undefended and to aspire to. Bill says it in step 7 in the 12 and 12, to aspire toward humility. I was a long ways from that 40 years ago. To aspire to humility? No, I was subject to humiliation and I tried to avoid that at all costs. But now, humility is truth for me. I want to live in the light. I want to live in the truth of reality as reality is. What are the facts? What's real? The image I have is I was a puppet on strings. Now, I tied the strings to people. I tied the strings to circumstances. I tied the strings to events. but people and circumstances and events pulled the strings, and Herbie was the puppet. Always afraid I'm going to be pulled in the wrong direction because I had no agency. I had no, and Dr. Berger nails it when he says, keeping our center of gravity deep inside ourselves. That's that core of goodness, that center of gravity, that soul, that spirit, that is Herb. You might see me in 10 years in a coffin. That's not Herb. That's just Herb's earth suit. Herb gone. Whatever that life force is that was Herb, he's gone. Some of these things I don't intend on saying, but I do anyway. So I try not to allow things outside of me to influence me. And one of the concepts that I heard, which is a nice simile for us today with, if you have a channel changer, that I hold the channel changer. I hold the channel changer. I can respond in any way that I choose to. I can have life manifest in the way I choose to have it manifest today. And that's what, again, Dr. Berger talks about, not dependent on environmental support, but deep inside me, having that sense of Herb and support, as I said, with the partner. I'm going to read this part. I have the capability and responsibility for taking care of my needs, of being self-supporting, not self-centered, but appropriately self-caring, independent and simultaneously interdependent. That balance that Melody Beattie talks about in Codependent No More. The balance, independent, but interdependent. Both choices on my part that I manage and regulate and adjust appropriately. I try to manage but not control. Manage but not control my need for belonging, being lovable, being loved, being loving, to be safe and to be happy, to manage it, but not to control it. I don't control anything. That serenity prayer is the center point of a lot of my consciousness. I don't control anything. I influence some things outside, some things inside. My discernment is, what do I influence? And how can I influence for optimal living? I try not to manipulate myself and others. I need to learn to be okay as I am, warts and all, especially with being okay with reality as it actually manifests. See, I see reality as a capital R. Yeah, God, as I don't understand it, is manifesting on a second by second by second basis as a material reality. It's a thought I haven't quite connected to or penetrated or in any sort of experiential sense, but I have an intellectual idea which is incredibly comforting and motivating to me, to keep me in a consciousness of the present moment. I need, in the final lines I just came before we opened up tonight, I need community to support my individuality. What I got, not sure it was logical, but it was what I got today. Thanks.
Thank you, Herb. And we're going to bring in Roger and Alan. There you go.
All right, Raj, why don't you take a swing at that ball that Herb just lobbed over the plate for us?
Well, I appreciate so much, Herb, your willingness to go with, your reactions to what you read earlier and the notes that you took on that. For me, it was a very positive experience. How do you feel about trying something different at this point, Herb?
I was excited to do it, and I feel really wonderful that I took the risk, actually.
That's how you look, and your energy was right there the whole time. So good for you. And this is, to me, it's a perfect example of the freedom that you're talking about.
Yeah.
It just backs up and supports so much of what you were sharing in the content of what you had to say. It's like that implicit in that, as you know, often spend a lot of time in preparation and will read my presentations, which is interesting because I've never done that before with presentations, but I find myself with this subject matter wanting to work it and rework it and rework it. And then I'm so happy with the process of it, what I've come up with. I don't want to leave important stuff I want to share out, right? That's the thing. When I do that, I look back and go, oh crap. And I still do it anyway, because I'll start to improvise. I can't read over things that I've prepared without changing it every time, usually significantly changing it. So I just wanted to share that. I really appreciate your willingness. I want to share this too. Alan and I were talking earlier. I'm aware at sometimes, like right now, that my voice starts to get shaky on me, and Alan pointed out my hands are shaky too. And I did want to mention that is exacerbated if I'm excited or nervous about something, but it's primarily an effect of prednisone medication, a corticosteroid that I've needed to go on regularly the past year for a kidney disease that I have, because it reliably brings my kidneys back online, functioning much more the way that they're supposed to. But I meant to mention it a few weeks ago when I was the main presenter. So it drives me crazy. I hate the way my voice sounds if I listen to any of this on replay. But I did want to share that.
Well,
in addition to gaining about, go ahead, Herb.
Fortunately, what you say masks the way you say.
Thank you. Also, I gain about 20 pounds every time I get to go on my prednisone, and get quite moody and a bunch of other fun side effects. But I am tapering off it now, again, as my kidneys have come back online, we'll call it again. But I did want to mention that. So a couple of things, Herb and Alan and everyone tonight. When Tom was reading about whenever we are disturbed, if we look deeply enough into it, we will see an unhealthy emotional dependency. And what that brought to mind for me tonight was, I think as I look back at myself and my life and the therapy and stuff I've done on myself and the work over the decades, that what I see is I'm in the most trouble with my dependency when I'm pretending like I don't have any. And in my early 20s, I adopted ideas about who I should be, where I had this glorious self-image of being an incredibly autonomous, independent person. And I stayed there for a few years in my early 20s. And I look back now, and it is embarrassing. I like how you use that word. It's humiliating, because more than anything, I think that prevented progress for me in terms of needing to stay as far away from the reality of what I felt a lot of the time and the reality of who I was as I possibly could, because I didn't want to recognize any kind of dependency. And the way I understand that now is I didn't want to risk being disappointed, right? If I counted on people, if I let them get close to me, I didn't want to risk the possibility of being hurt. And I took refuge in that for quite a long time. So part of the process of change for me was recognizing that I had gone to war against my dependencies. And a big part of, making some progress was starting to open up to the reality of my dependency needs that were not met growing up, and the frailty and fear and vulnerability of those feelings. I remember once I was working in one of Nathaniel Brandon's groups, and we had these foam bats back in the 70s called Bataka bats that that you could grab and fight with somebody with them. And I took great pride in the fact that I had figured out how to snap my wrist at just the right moment so that these harmless bats could actually leave welts on people's backs. And if I really got into it and kind of lost control in a way, I would, depending on who I was fighting with and so on. But I actually took pleasure in that for a while because I was so identified with that aggressiveness. And we'd come back from lunch as a group, maybe 30 people, and another guy and I had gone at each other with that. So then I was working on an issue. I can't even remember what the issue was, but one of the incomplete sentences, as I'm going around the group, being assertive and strong and all that stuff, one of the sentences Nathaniel Brandon gave me was, if I could tell you how delicate I am. If I could tell you how delicate I am.
Wow.
And I spun around. I wanted to choke him to death, man. I just glared daggers at him. But I turned back and started to work with it. And I hated it. Every sentence that I did, and he wouldn't change the route. He kept me on it. And a few people later, I started to cry. And then I started to cry deeper. And then about half of the men in the group started to cry, especially the men, right? Because of this refusal to acknowledge vulnerability, sadness, grief, our need to look strong, have the answers, be perfect. And I'm not saying that's unique to men by any means, but I'm just speaking because as a man in that situation, that's what was coming up for me. So that's one thing I wanted to share, that I don't want us to turn these admonitions about dependency into shoulds and shouldn'ts, because then that just leads us into this judgmental place where it makes it even harder for us to become aware of and embrace the reality of our dependencies and then become able to accept them. And as we keep talking about, that's often a key piece of change. Just a couple other thoughts. You talk about reality with a capital R, Herb, and I like that a lot. And Nathaniel Brandon is obviously very much on that wavelength, that our allegiance with our consciousness is to discerning reality as best we can. He also gave me sentences at times like, if I were to admit my flaws, if I were to admit my vulnerabilities, if I were to talk about the things I'm never going to talk about. And with those endings, he cut through a lot of my, facade, my persona very, very quickly, because it just begs you to go deeper. But lately, I've been trying to experiment with the practice of, if I do something I feel bad about, or somebody else does something that upsets me or whatever, or I find myself going over and over a situation in the past. And I know there's absolutely an appropriate place for looking at the past and for, recognizing harm that we've done to others and ourselves and making amends and learning from our mistakes. All of that is absolutely important and essential. But for me, there's a part of me that is overbalanced in that direction at times. So what I become aware of is, wow, everything I do that with after that situation is done, that's just me trying to rewrite history. That's me not accepting reality.
Right.
That's me not accepting the reality of what happened. What would happen if I just say, that is what happened, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it now, unless I hurt somebody and need to make amends about it. So it's been a very interesting experiment for me. I don't spend nearly as much time now dwelling on the past as I used to, because for some reason, I really see that's just me going to war against reality. It's all my shoulds coming up. What happened if I just let that go? Yeah, I did that. Yeah, they did that. Yeah, it's done. We were each doing the best we could do. And that idea is also taking on deeper and deeper levels of reality, which is opening up a lot more pathways to forgiveness for myself and to other people. I've been saying it for decades to myself and to friends and to clients, but now I'm really starting to get it. At that moment in time,
Right.
under the influence of whatever, intense emotions or misguided thinking or, whatever defenses and self-protection I was up against, I really do the best that I can. And so does everyone else. And that can include some pretty horrendous freaking things. Okay, pretty harmful, pretty damaging things. But I'm starting to appreciate the truth of that.
Yeah.
And that also is helping a lot with forgiveness of myself and forgiveness of others. I'll stop there. So, Alan, because I'd love to hear what you'd like to share as well. So go ahead.
Well, thank you. And Herb, thank you for a very thoughtful and personal reflection on this chapter. Look, that's what this is all about, is us getting honest with ourselves in terms of what this stuff means to us. And that's how we're going to grow with this, is to really take this stuff on and chew it up and digest it and see what fits and try it on, right? If we're not sure, and see is there some truth to this. And, when I've done that in my own recovery, it reveals a lot to me. Some oftentimes a blind spot I've had, that I couldn't see things, or I couldn't, I wasn't aware of certain things that are going on that were pretty darn significant in my life. One of them is this whole issue about safety that we're talking about here. My whole life was a test of my invulnerability from very early on, from 11 years old on. And that still persisted into my adulthood very, very strongly. But, this whole thing about the discerning our emotional dependency, it becomes very important, if we're going to be safe, to see where we're overly dependent on other people. Because I cannot be safe if, like you said, Herb, if I'm giving everybody my emotional center of gravity, then my feeling safe depends on how well somebody takes care of me.
Right.
Instead of having an active role in being able to protect my psychological boundaries and to ensure my own personal safety in whatever situation I'm in. Our dear friend, Dr. John Amodeo, who wrote a wonderful book called Love and Betrayal, he's been in our workshop sometimes in the past. But, in his book, he talks about there's never a betrayal that is not accompanied also with a self-betrayal. They go hand in hand. And I can see that in terms of what's been going on in my life, in terms of I overlooked, what do we call it? Self-delusion. I did not want to see some of the things I was looking at.
Yeah.
And thought that somehow that they're not going to apply to me. I've claimed my special status in life. We do that, or I do that, and I know you do that, and and Roger does that when he's giving welts to other people on their back. I didn't even know about that, Roger. Oh my God, man! So it wasn't just the poles on the tennis court that got beat,
And the rackets that was smashing into those poles.
Oh my God. I think Roger supported Dunlop rackets when they were going down in their sales single-handedly.
I tried, but they still pretty much went under. I don't know if they make rackets anymore or not. Yeah.
He would break one of those rackets almost on a weekly basis, or he'd come up I love to watch him, because if his first hit did not break the racket sufficiently, he would get a wind up and then go after that post, man, until that thing looked like it had been through the war. I mean,
the picture of emotional sobriety right there, man. The very picture.
We didn't
Talk
know
about being a
we
slave
were
to
exploring the
perfectionism.
other side of emotional sobriety than the non-sobriety dimension of it.
A little before and after.
That was
There you go.
part. So anyway, it was a great reflection. And look at this safety issue has a lot to do with our active participation in our life. The way that I love the Karen Horney said it is she said that somehow when we give our emotional center of gravity to others, we've lost the ability to be sincere with ourselves. I really like that there's a certain tone, quality to that makes a lot of sense. Because I think if we look at ourselves and our life and how we lived it, there was no sincerity with ourselves, none at all. We abused ourselves. We put ourselves in dangerous situations. You know, I mean, just even drinking was a matter of, a violation of our personal safety. The way that you and I drank, I mean, it wasn't like a normal person. It's not like one, glass of wine with a meal. I mean, that was not how I, drank at all. So anyway, this was a great discussion tonight. Thank you so much.
Does someone need to believe in God to successfully overcome addiction? Well, the way I like to think about what the program does, it connects us to who we really are. And what does that mean? Well, there's this incredible force in you and I, this growth force. It's the force that moved us from crawling to walking. You wanted to take those first steps. And when you fell, and you fell a lot of times, you didn't let your failures stop you. You picked yourself up, you learned from it. And how many times did you fail before you walked? You failed as many times as you needed to. You see that force, I call it a biological imperative, a psychological imperative, a spiritual imperative. It's moving you towards wholeness. It's moving you to be what you can be. Just like in the acorn is all the information it needs to become an oak tree. In you is all the information you need to become you. Become a you that can cope with life and to deal with whatever you need to deal with to be okay. And that's what I'll talk about in my new book, The 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety.